Oh, I know. Yeah, go.
Mr. Speaker, when we talk about aggressively downsizing megacities, what we intend to do is to follow the China model of actually creating many smaller cities of similarly large, smaller sizes, but as well as regional capitals in different places around the country. What happens in these developing countries is that usually they're very big countries with one capital concentrated in this place. But for example, like in China, for example, what happened is that they developed many different cities by actually pouring in infrastructure investments, creating special economic zones to actually incentivize companies to move into those cities and actually. So I'm going to divide my speech into two parts. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the harms that the people in the city face when the people in the city face when the cities become too big. And secondly, I'm going to talk about a comparative as to why a world where small regional cities exist is better than the world where you have megacities. So firstly, on the harms that people say, is that there are two groups of people that are actually harmed by this. The first one is people who have already been living in the city. When you have a megacity, you have a limited amount of land, but because of that, right, because of land and infrastructure, when people actually keep moving in, right, into your city, because due to economic reasons or due to the reasons, the demand increases drastically. Like for example, we can see soaring house prices in Jakarta. We can see soaring house prices in Tokyo, where people are forced to live in little cubicles, forced to give up a lot of land, and poor people sometimes are just forced to move out of the city. We see this huge rise is not only in cost of housing, but it translates to other cost of living expenses, cost of living, and the difficulty to afford for people, the middle class, for the poor people, results in a huge decrease in the quality of life and experiences that these people can experience. So also, what happens also is that it puts strain on the welfare systems of that country, like things like education, things like transportation, things like policing. Like it's inadequate. Like the state no longer is able to maintain like a sustainable education system, a transportation system, or police system. Basically, just because there's so many people in that country, in that city, they're unable to actually carry out these welfare systems in a way that would actually be beneficial for these people. So secondly, the second group of people, yes.
So what ends up happening in most circumstances that surrounding that megacity, mushroom satellite cities in order to supply those labor demands. And what ends up happening is that government built like transportation system to connect them. Why isn't this a viable option to have kind of like a spillover effect into other areas?
Because that's not what's happening in the real world. In Bangladesh, for example, in Dhaka, you have a one big city, like people and really expensive restaurants and really expensive housing, and you have around you don't have mushroom cities, you just have slums, you just have people living in absolute poverty. There are people who live in people who live on like less than $2 a day, people who are living in absolute poverty around the city area. We don't have these mushroom satellite cities that you talk about because it's just not sustainable for a country to actually, with that limited land space and that huge number of people, to actually build a sustainable transportation system. I'm going to tell you why transportation is so important. It may seem as though transportation is something that's trivial, right? But for every minute that that people are stuck in traffic, right, city gridlock, stuck in traffic, is huge losses on efficiency of a country's economic gains. In terms of like in every minute spent, millions and millions of dollars are being lost just because people get stuck in traffic for hours and hours. If you've been to Jakarta, you realize that you can get stuck in traffic for 5-6 hours. It's nothing very different from actually. It's nothing very hard to believe. And this is because we believe, right, that actually having a better transportation system would effectively increase the economic growth of the country. Yes.
So as the world moves towards having greater amounts of automation, artificial intelligence, and less focus on actual human labor, can you tell us what do developing countries have in terms of attracting foreign investment and attracting people to actually buy stuff from their country?
That's exactly it, right? When you have like smaller subgroups, right, then you have a larger consumer base that because companies now know they can move towards other cities which are closer to rural areas, and they know that when you incentivize that and you build those infrastructures there, it necessarily leads to a larger consumer base for these companies to actually go into, as opposed to concentrating everything in one place where you cannot actually like if you're talking about automation, right? We believe the benefits accrue on our side because simply because of the increased benefit of getting of the larger customer base. Secondly, the second group of people that are harmed, right, are the people who move to this city. Very often, right, these people, right, there are a lot of people who move from rural areas. They move to big cities because they believe, right, they've been told that yes, if I move to this is the only chance I can have of having a better life. When they move to these cities, many of the time, right, a lot of the time, right, they're led by false, like, imperfect information that they think like, oh, I'll go there, I'll get a job, it'll be easy, I will be able to survive, because people are irrational decision makers, right? A lot of them keep pouring and pouring in, even though they know that cost of living is high, even though they know that they might not find a job. A lot of them are optimistic like buyers. They always want to like think that yes, I will manage to get a job. What happens to these people, right, is that they then get pushed aside to the slums. They then get pushed aside to places where they've already given up all they have in their rural area to move to the city in search of a better life. But actually, then now they face a life that may not be better, like or marginally like worse. Yeah. So secondly, on the comparative, right, what we propose, right, is that we have smaller regional centers that are closer to rural areas. And how will we do this? Like I told you, government infrastructure developments, spending like special economic zones where you subsidize firms to actually move there. And two things now happen, right? Firstly, right, businesses in rural areas, right, people are more incentivized to start up businesses because the barriers to entry are just much lower. You no longer have to pay a huge transportation cost. You actually have a closer, like the risk to starting business is so much lower. You don't have to relocate and move to Jakarta. That actually incentivizes so many people to start more businesses because they know that, okay, now I'm starting at a city that's like not too far away. And there's also like a larger customer base because now in this city I can sell to all these rural areas as opposed to Jakarta being already concentrated by just the people who are living in Jakarta. So this necessarily leads to a lot of economic like benefits, right? Like first of all, basically there's food on the table for these rural people now when they actually move into more businesses because there's more jobs being created. There's more money coming into these rural areas. There's necessarily more people like moving into these areas, more money coming into these areas. Secondly, right, when businesses move towards these rural areas, right, what you get, right, is you get a huge transfer of technology in terms of like people in these rural areas they are skilled in today's workforce. In terms of like when these companies move forward, right, move there, right, you get like positive externalities in terms of like how people businesses can learn from companies that have moved there, and the development of infrastructure. For example, companies are incentivized to educate the people in the rural areas because they also need to look for their workforce, right? Companies are incentivized to do things like to do things like job training, reskilling, to do things like skills training and stuff like that. For those reasons, we're very proud to propose.
Panel, in the face of rise of mechanization, automation, and artificial intelligence, developing world today are in a precarious situation where they are losing any ability to attract deeply necessary foreign investment that is so necessary in order to create an economic engine that will move these developing countries to a competitive arena in which is necessary in order to develop local industries so close to innovation and to close the technological gap and to make sure that these developing countries in itself becomes economically strong enough to negotiate with the superpowers leverage and with stronger economic power throughout the world. And that is what we're prioritizing in today's debate. Two things I will be proving through my speech. Number one, well, why will this benefit and with all the benefits that accrue within megacities will it be enjoyed by everyone in the end of the day? And number two, on why is having megacities absolutely necessary in today's paradigm, right? So all my rebuttals will be integrated within my analysis. So number one, I will prove to you on how the natural incentives of government to provide development and fund to different areas of the state is able to benefit and accrue all these incentives that will be enjoyed by everybody in the particular country, right? So notice that even in states which have megacities, right? So different parts of the countries itself also have different advantages and different resources that is able to be utilized in order for them to cater to the megacity in what we're talking about, right? Things such as when we have Kuala Lumpur as the megacity in Malaysia per se, we have Klang, who is acting as a port in which to export particular products that we have in our city, right? And things such as in Pahang, where we have mining in order for us to cater to all the industrial things that's happening within our paradigm, right? And also how we have Johor in order for us to cater to the bigger economic structure of Malaysia, right? So all of this means that even within these particular countries, we have each individual state that will be utilized to its fullest in order to have these mega cities even work in the first place, right? So number two is also I will be proving more on how even in the political means itself, right? How these people who are controlling these mega cities have political incentive for them to want to care about rural areas that they also want to talk about, with in their world being neglected. We believe that this is not true, right? Because in these particular states, we have voters as well. We have people who are very concerned within their economic stance, right? So these people, if they know that the state is abandoning them just because they're not a mega city, obviously the state will lose voters, in which will in the end of the day just not benefit the state in itself, right? So number two, lastly, with the creation of megacities that we want to prioritize, it will the development that accrues within the megacity will just spill out into other areas of the particular state. So how does this happen, right? So the critical limits that we acknowledge that we have in a particular megacity, what I want to talk about, how we don't have enough land to be able to cater to people and all that stuff. So what does this even mean in the first place, right? So we mean that people who still want to strive in a megacity would have to go out and go to places near the megacity itself in order for them to want to go back and forth to work and so on and so forth. So how people who are living in Kuala Lumpur, in order for them to want to cater to their needs, would have to live in Bangi because they don't want to perhaps go to stay in a expensive condo or whatever it is that they want to talk about, right? Yeah. So what does this mean? It means that we create satellite cities within this particular megacity, which means that now in order for them to want to have a better life, right? So they would work harder in order for them to increase their wages per se. And why is important because it is they become economically viable themselves, because even though they're living out of that particular megacity, at least they are still able to have some sort of representative in itself, right? So what happens next after this, right? So it means that when one particular state one particular location out of that megacity is filled, then they will go to the next one, perhaps go to Gombak the next, perhaps go to Kajang or whatever it is that they want to go to. But we believe that in the end of the day, the existence of the megacity which surrounds these small places is beneficial in the end of the day, right? So how do people in this particular place live in, right? So they would want to perhaps have better living conditions. They would work harder in order for them to perhaps move on to a better condominium or whatever it is that they want to talk about. And we believe that we are able to cater these people more. So the conclusion is that with all of this happening in our particular state, we are able to benefit enjoyed by all the people living in this particular society, right? So why is having megacities even absolutely necessary to begin with, especially in the developing countries where you want wealth in itself, right? So if you do not have megacity, what happens next? We believe that all the local companies that exist within the particular paradigm would be more globally competitive, right? Because they would know that they would have to compete with MNCs and so on and so forth, right? So when they have when they have to globally, when they have to compete with MNCs which exist within their economical spheres, then they would want to perhaps have better manufacturing processes, right? So when they have, in comparison to your world where you just put them in a rural area where they don't have resources in order to do so and don't have globally global competitive to do so, they were going to operate inefficiently, and they're unable to catch up with this particular people who are already globally competitive in itself, right? So why is this even important for us to note? Because if you want to sell your local products and only to the people in which that lives in your state. We believe that you're going to like have an industry that is just minimal and unable to like even cater to begin with, right? So tax returns for the state would be low because you don't have that incentive to want to be better than this global than these MNCs, right? So in the end of the day, when you are just working in a state where you just have to cater to the locals, we believe that there's not the tax returns that you have to pay is not even big, and it's not will not even encourage to like you don't even have capital to in order to pay for like the people that work for you in the end of the day, right? So number two is also how these people are missing out on the opportunity to make workforce even globally competitive if they don't have megacities, right? So there's no like style transfers within this particular scenario. There's no skill transfer within these people because they're working just within themselves, right? So why is it important for us to even have skill transfer? Because at least in the end of the day, in our world, these people would be able to have the skill resources for them to set up their own companies per se, right? So now they're able to like put it like at a globally representation and not just like at a particular scenario, right? So how is this comparative on their world? These people would have this exposure to MNCs or globally incentive people, because in the end of the day, foreign investors that exist in your world will just go out when they do not have like people to cater to them, right? So what we're willing to do is we're willing to sacrifice short-term wealth inequality that we want to talk about, but at least in our world, we will have more jobs, we will have access to economic opportunities, because we acknowledge that these are the structures that exist in megacities, and we've never been prouder to oppose.
I think it is intuitively obvious that the megacities model that might ostensibly have worked for the last several decades is starting to show signs, or many signs, of like huge problems with regard to development and the welfare of the people who are migrating en masse to such megacities. It is the reason why there are massive traffic jams in Jakarta. It is the reason why there's massive air pollution in Beijing and to some extent Shanghai. It is the reason why property prices in Hong Kong have risen to an extreme degree. It is the reason why people in Dhaka live in slums. There is a point at which it is impossible for a megacity to provide adequate infrastructure for the people who are migrating there, and I'll explain why in a bit. And that is precisely the reason why we will aggressively depopulate these areas. So just to clarify the model that Justin has already talked about, the policy is pretty simple, right? When we say aggressively downsize these megacities, what we're going to do in the China model. So China obviously megacity and cities, and eventually aggressively downsize these cities by A, promoting the development of second-tier cities, which are mostly regional capitals in other parts of China, Tianjin, Guangzhou, Chongqing, all of these other second-tier cities which form alternative industrial and commercial hubs within the country. Secondly, what we'll do is to incentivize people to move over, right? Either incentivizing companies by providing them tax breaks to move to these second-tier cities, like sponsoring the development of massive amounts of infrastructure in these second-tier cities, or perhaps even restricting the number of people who can migrate to like major cities like Beijing and Shanghai under like your hukou system in China, for example, which restricts the sort of welfare you can get based on which province you came from. So obviously all of these measures ensure that you can aggressively depopulate these cities in favor of second-tier cities elsewhere. So let's deal with rebuttal first. There are two major arguments that leader of the opposition talks about. The first one is about how megacities somehow increase efficiency, because under their model, companies must now compete with MNCs given the fact that MNCs are located in these megacities. But I don't see why MNCs do not have the resources to locate themselves not only in the first-tier megacities under your model, but in like fairly large, like maybe not 10 million strong, but maybe 3 million strong second-tier cities under our model as well. MNCs generally have the resources to be able to have distribution networks, supply networks, or even like manufacturing networks in other cities as well. And I think the China model has proven that. So I don't see why competition is going to be reduced on our side just because we no longer rely exclusively on megacities. In fact, I'll tell you later in my speech why you are likely to chase MNCs away and therefore reduce foreign direct investment at the point in time in which you rely exclusively on megacities. Secondly, the second thing they talked about was how currently we don't see enough resources in like more rural areas or in other provinces, which means that economic development or like attracting businesses to set up shop in these areas becomes prohibitively expensive or just simply becomes impractical. But you see, that is a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If the central government's opinion is that rural areas like, I don't know, Terengganu and Kelantan in the Malaysian equivalent, or perhaps like the other outlying islands of Indonesia or other parts of Java are not worth investing in, then clearly businesses are not going to go there. And then it's a self-reinforcing cycle that screws over everyone who does live in those rural areas. Like, why should central KL or central Jakarta be privileged in terms of economic development, government subsidies, and infrastructural investments than other places where other people live in rural areas where they deserve the same like access and opportunity to economic development, rather than having to uproot their entire livelihoods, their families, their culture, their communities, their way of life, having to squeeze together in a 10 million strong like megacity where they'll have a very uncertain quality of life. That's not principally fair. No, thank you. Therefore, given the fact that the developmental benefits of their megacity model are uncertain, and given the fact that they are creating a self-fulfilling prophecy and screwing over rural areas, let's analyze the impacts and elaborate on what Justin has already told you with regard to what happens in these megacities and what happens to rural areas. The reason why megacities cannot accommodate the present inflow of immigrants is for several reasons, right? Firstly, even if you live in a satellite city or in a suburb like surrounding New York, surrounding Beijing, surrounding KL, for example, most people end up working in businesses that are already established within the city center, which means that even if you want to expand, transport options like LRT lines or highways, or just basically build more business buildings in the city center to accommodate the increased inflow of migrants and inflow of workers, you are competing for the same limited amount of land. Expansion is limited. It leads to massive traffic jams, which cost billions of dollars in lost productivity, high property prices, which price out poorer people out of like newly gentrified districts. You are basically screwing over the poor, and this is just an inefficient economic development model. This is intuitively obvious. The second problem is administrative in nature, that local authorities can execute the federal government's plans for expansion of infrastructure only up to a certain point, beyond which it is just physically or administratively impossible to deal with the millions of migrants that come into your megacities annually. At some point in time, sure, in the best case scenario, you have satellite cities, right? In the worst case scenario, you're going to have slums. Lack of proper electricity, lack of proper sewage, lack of proper water supply, lack of proper transport options, lack of proper policing options, which lead to basically centers of poverty where crime is concentrated and you don't actually get the employment opportunities that you hope for when you move to the major cities. Third reason is that you have to build around existing infrastructure, right? Like in second tier cities, which are not as big, you can build from scratch, right? Take the outlying land, build all the infrastructure from scratch. You don't have a lot of problem city planning. At the point in time in which I have to build around existing infrastructure in central KL, central Jakarta, central Beijing, I'm going to have to deal with the concerns of people who already live there, slowing down developmental projects, slowing down the pace of development that ensures that we have adequate infrastructure to support the people living in there. And last but not least, the idea that megacities create their own myths, right? That because in the psyche of individuals who live in rural areas, the one area for economic opportunity is to move to your federal, your administrative or your economic capital. Chances are everyone is going to move to Jakarta, even though maybe there's not enough jobs to support all of those people who are going to move to Jakarta or Dhaka or Hyderabad or wherever it may be. And as a result, you are basically gambling away the lives and the futures of many of these migrants. The second thing I want to talk about is about what happens to rural areas, right? You depopulate rural areas when there are fewer people to act as a local taxation base so they can enact welfare policy. There's less labor to support businesses in local economy and businesses move out. That the only people who are left behind are either ethnic minorities who don't want to leave their communities and are therefore screwed over because there's lack of economic opportunity, or elderly people who are left behind because they just cannot physically move and adjust to life in a megacity, which means that these areas essentially become economically unviable and uninhabitable for the people who remain behind. And because the incentives of the federal government are simply to develop the central areas, you are basically depriving them of the tax revenue, exploiting these rural areas, which is why in places like Sarawak, for example, even though they provide a lot of natural resources and tax gains for the central government uses the revenue to invest in KL because that's where they think the future is, but it screws over rural areas and other states as a result. For all of those reasons, I urge you to vote for opening government.
Time. it may seem trivial at this point in the debate, but I think it's worth noting that the context that we're talking about is that it is still a developing country. So in the government bench, the proposal is that while you are still a developing country, you want to depopulate your economic engine and then try to gamble and try to build other cities elsewhere, ladies and gentlemen. Whereas on the opposition bench, yes, we actually do agree that China was a good model. We don't think Beijing ever stopped being a megacity. We don't think, for example, Shenzhen stopped being a megacity. Guangzhou never stopped being a megacity, ladies and gentlemen. Those things persisted to be the primary economic engines of our state. And those things funded our ability to be able to have all the things that you wanted on your side of the house. The question in this debate is whether we should depopulate it or we should continue to allow it to populate so they can continue to be the engine of our economic progress at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. That's the fundamental clarification that needs to happen in this debate. But second, the thing that didn't occur on the opening government is any form of engagement, because they told us that with depopulating megacities, then apparently we will still be able to maintain the tax revenue, the attraction for foreign direct investment, the ability for you to innovate, as well as the ability for you to get any of high-tech industries. Those incentives apparently will still remain, even though the primary reason why those companies came into your country to begin with is now gone, depopulated. The lack of a consumer base of that megacity, the lack of an educated workforce within that megacity to be able to attract all those things from occurring to begin with. The only mitigation that occurred in Adil's speech was to tell us that I'm sure multinational corporations still have the strength to be able to invest and go to other places that are rural areas. That's not the point. It's not whether they have the capacity to do so, it's whether they want to do so, ladies and gentlemen. And Justin's point was that whether or not, well, it's still millions of people that they still want to sell to, apparently, ladies and gentlemen. But that's still not enough. You might get Nike still wanting to sell your products, sell their products in those countries, ladies and gentlemen. But do they create jobs? Because selling products doesn't equate to creating jobs under their side of the house, because you still have automation in manufacturing. You have artificial intelligence to make sure that most people are not going to get a job at the end of the day. So what ends up happening? The positioning that needs to exist in this particular debate is not just to get multinational corporations to want to sell to your country, but to set up headquarters in your country, to want to innovate in your country, to invest in your country, ladies and gentlemen. And that doesn't happen unless they can trust that those high-tech, high-requirement, highly educated, or tax incentives that accrue, or consumer base that can pay a higher price, ladies and gentlemen, exists, for example, in a megacity under outside house. With those two clarifications of context in mind, ladies and gentlemen, the opening government has to provide any way they can sustain any of the development they want under their side of the house. First, how do we fund the robust welfare system and provide development in rural areas that the government want at the end of the day? Notice that welfare systems to help the poor old lady that has to stay in the rural areas and all those things still, ladies and gentlemen, requires a massive amount of funds to be able to build either infrastructure to head into those rural areas or to be able to provide more than just subsistence care for those people in rural areas, ladies and gentlemen. The ability for you to do so only exists insofar that you have companies or investment that is more than what Shah told you, more than what the government provides in terms of just barely surviving local companies or non-globally competitive companies that can only sell to a local populace, and a local populace that doesn't even get much of a wage because it's not a multinational corporation paying you $20 an hour. It's a local company paying you, for example, $7 and are less tax. You don't get those high return investments under outside house that enable you to be able to fund all those welfare programs for people that live in rural areas on your side house. So that's our mitigatory mechanism for the opposition bench. But secondly, we also think that all your input to Elena, state-owned companies in order to incentivize people to move elsewhere, ladies and gentlemen. Spend billions of dollars to incentivize people to move from Shenzhen or Guangzhou, ladies and gentlemen, to move into rural areas. It requires shit ton of money to be able to incentivize that kind of behavior. We don't see how you're going to sustain that without having a megacity to be able to sustain that kind of cost into the long term. You need to prove the solvency of your mechanism at the end of the day. But secondly, what is also incredibly important is that megacities are the only way for developing countries, and most developing countries are this kind of developing country, do not have natural resources to be able to develop those particular countries. Before I go on, yes.
The reason why Dhaka, for example, loses a lot of MNCs to second-tier cities in neighboring India is because the high property prices inefficient infrastructure mean that MNCs have no incentive to want to invest in such godforsaken cities.
You're
if you're
playing a chicken and egg situation, right? Because like if Shah's right and tells you that satellite cities are created, and notice that they just say, well, best case scenario, satellite cities are created. Worst case scenario, slums are created. Without any sort of analysis in regards to why it's likely in regards for those slums in order to be created. When Shah gave you multiple levels of analysis as to why there are natural political incentives to develop those satellite cities and natural critical limits in order for you to have development in that scenario, ladies and gentlemen. You can have only so much people that can live in Kuala Lumpur, for example, and then there must be a spillover outside because people naturally cannot live there. Middle class people cannot afford property, they move to Cheras, for example, or they move to Gombak, or they move outside to Bangi, for example. That's a naturally occurring process. You need to actually rebut those things, Adil, as opposed to using rhetoric in order to dispel those arguments. But secondly, we told you that when it comes to whether or not you can innovate beyond things like natural resources, it's also the case that if you don't have natural resources, the only thing that you can do in an instance where no manufacturing jobs are going to exist by far and large for people because of automation, you also don't have natural resources to rely on the government bench. So what can you do at the end of the day? The only thing you can do is invest in creation technology, creative technology, ladies and gentlemen. Engage in a creative economy, being able to innovate, being able to push the boundaries to create a competitive advantage for countries. For example, Malaysia investing billions of dollars in making sure that there's innovative hub. In fact, having multi-billion-dollar investment to China to create a literal island off the coast of Malacca so they can just be an innovative center. Because Malaysia realizes they can rely on palm oil or manufacturing in order for them to actually be competitive. For example, Singapore, competitive with other economies in the world that are able to outcompete them when it comes to manufacturing because they have automation, but also far more advanced when it comes to high-tech industries. So in this particular scenario, the only way for you to be able to have those kind of innovations is under our side of the house. Fundamentally, at the end of this opening half exchange, OG has provided us no solutions in regards to how they can sustain any of the policies that they want under their side of the house. They've complained, they've laughed, and they've provided no analysis in regards to why it's worked. At the very least, under our side, provide you incentives to mitigate their concerns and fundamentally give you a path forward for developing countries in a changing world. Thank you.
All right.
Can I borrow anyone's time? I'm on 4%. I'm scared it's going to die.
Where's my phone? I pass you.
It's okay.
Okay.
It doesn't turn off, right?
No.
Okay. That's nice. Cool. Understand that megacities may seem successful, they may seem prosperous, but it's only meaningfully catering towards the richer and the higher classes within those megacities. We think that the majority within these areas, the lower middle class incomes, are the ones who are desperate yet stuck, and the ones get screwed over within these megacities. We think this is why it's particularly harmful. 3 things I'm going to talk about in my speech today. Number one, I'm going to talk about how or why megacities have minimal access towards meaningful opportunities. Number two, I'm going to talk about how it's difficult to survive within these cities. And number three, I'm going to talk about the likelihoods of in order for you to survive within these megacities. But before that, let's try to take opening out of this debate, right? So first things first, they told us that they can't sustain themselves, right? Because now when you spread out, megacities suddenly die out, right? Yeah. So no, first response is understand that the privileged and the rich and the people who do want to invest within these areas will remain to stay within these places anyway, right? The reason is because they know that they want to maintain MNCs, that the rich and the privileged can always afford it, they remain. The people who do go out are the ones who are of the lower income, who are desperate. But secondly, right, we think that the difference is the difference is that those who are lower income are the ones that go out. But thirdly, right, megacities at the end of the day, they don't die out. But what do we do, right? Because of the added cities that we create, or the added within these rural areas, we actually added more sustainability, right? When you're able to open more cities within other areas, or you're able to prosper other cities within our areas, we think that the more skillful people that we shoved out of our bigger cities can finally work within those areas and find meaningful jobs there. We think that's how they're able to sustain their smaller cities or their new cities that come up. So the difference is, currently, we just don't bother to care about these low or these skillful people who are lower middle income. The reason is because your mega city is working so well for you, but it's only working so well for you for the richer people. So the poor people get screwed over. The moment when we actually bother to care about these low middle income people, and we actually spread it out to them, the more reason for them to go out and actually practice the skills that they actually attained when they initially wanted to go to these mega cities. No, thank you. So first, I want to talk about how we have meaningful access to minimal access towards meaningful opportunities within the city. Understand that a lot of people come to the city, right? It's so concentrated. So that means that the demand of jobs is just particularly high, right? So people within these smaller areas or these rural areas go for high education and study so hard. But at the end of the day, they end up going to the city because those are the only places that could provide the kind of jobs that they want, right? But at the end of the day, the kind of meaningful jobs that they initially wanted to get just aren't there for them, right? So meaning the meaningful jobs that are there are just not accessible to them, or they're just very scarce in nature, right? So therefore they end up taking jobs which are most desperate of the things that are immediate to them, right? So no, thank you, sit down, don't heckle. So in order for businesses to actually consume more workers, because the scarcity of jobs are the jobs are so small, in order for them to actually consume more workers, it will just take a longer time, right? So what happens is because they just don't have enough capital to support more workers, right? The reason why they just don't have enough capital to support workers because they just don't make that much amount of money, right? Those companies. So I'm not trying to contradict here. So there are companies that actually work and are sustainable, like these MNCs, but there are also local companies who can't afford to consume so many workers. So at the end of the day, they just can't afford to pay back towards consume a lot of workers and pay them a high amount of cost, right? To give them a lot of money. So the highly competitive companies just can't sustain high packs. Therefore, the amount of money they make is just spread out then towards the workers that they do, hire. And understand that the workers that they do hire are just so desperate to get these jobs anyway. Therefore, they go into these jobs at the end of the day. But why don't people walk away, right? Because people are desperate and they need the money now. Because at the end of the day, you just take whatever you get. Because you understand that these are the kind of jobs that you've studied so hard within your rural areas, but there's no jobs that actually open up in your area. The only job opportunity that you have is within these areas. Even if they're odd jobs, these are the kind of jobs that can actually put food on the table. That's why they don't go up. Before that, yes, Miff.
Okay, so you say that once you have downsized and disempowered all these megacities, the rich, powerful, and educated will stay. Why would they, when they could just leave and go to first world countries or go to neighboring states that are much more developed and fulfill their demands much better?
If the rich and the privileged wants to go out and fulfill the demands, they'll already be going already now. I think that the people who are still staying here is because they choose to invest in sustain within megacities right now, right? So second, why it's difficult for people to survive? I think they've mentioned it a bit, but I'll explain to you more, right? Because these people, they just can't prop up, right? So they come in hoping for something better, but they just can't climb up the ladder of the ladder of success that they wanted to, right? So it looks like how does this look like, right? It just looks like the high costs of living that exist within these areas, right? So because more companies they just can't afford to take more people in. Therefore, the majority the people who are harmed within these areas are the majority lower income people. These are the most vulnerable. Why are they so vulnerable, right? Understand that we're talking about developing nations. So what does developing nation looks like, right? They look like areas with poor welfare. They look like areas with poor education. They look like areas which just, even if they have some form of good education, we think good education or good kind of welfare or medication or whatever, it's all very private and therefore it's priced really high. So the lower income people just never get the chance to attain these kind of benefits towards them, right? So at the end of the day, these are the lower income people are the ones that are screwed over and pushed aside. But thirdly, right, we think that, no thank you, not taking anymore. We think the likelihood in order for people to actually survive within these areas is that they form enclaves within these areas, right? So they go around the outskirts of these, the outskirts of this area. So the problem with this is that these people who stay within the outskirts of this area are, number one, they're just rarely listened to, and they're just easily neglected. The reason is why, because it's just harder to monitor them, right? So it's harder for policing, it's harder for people to go around because they're the outskirts. So therefore, the majority of the people that do live within these outskirts that you probably wanted, we just think at the end of the day, they're just fucked over. So in our world, what we do is that we spread out resources and make it easier for those who are stuck in the city to actually finally go out, and for companies to finally invest within those smaller cities because they know that there are actually skillful workers who are willing to work there. So when we they we'll go to the certain extent of like providing assistance for schools outside, or providing reallocation of budget and human capital, providing jobs, or having like housing subsidies that will ensure families to actually sustain themselves in these cities. We think that that's how like smaller cities or smaller areas can sustain themselves, right? But I missed mentioning this. I'm just gonna mention it again. So basically they also told us that we also create like automation within we have automation in megacities, right? We tell you, number one, the automation is just moving too fast, and therefore the skillful workers within the workers that we do have are just not skilled enough to actually go with or like to adapt towards the to the transition of the fast transition towards that automation within these cities. Therefore, we think you just lose out on these people, and you only cater to a very small group of people that you seem that will help you. Thank you.
Oh yeah, no, I had it. I dropped it. Oh, I got it. I had it. That's okay.
Oh, sorry guys. Sorry. My dad is freaking out.
Oh.
I don't know.
Once they know you're safe, you can watch the next.
Yeah. Sorry, so sorry. Developing cities in absence of megacities stagnates the economic growth that was once propelled by megacities and regresses to progress towards a richer country. Side opening government and closing government cannot just come up here and say that megacities simply cannot sustain the life of different individuals. We don't think that this is the comparative. We think they must prove that in a world in which megacities are forced to downsize, that means the net economic growth becomes a lot larger. Under their side, they have not done this at all. The best that both teams do is prove that the residents within megacities live really shit lives. I think that this is a really bad comparative to the possible the higher economic growth that comes from mega cities. In my speech today, I would bring you two new arguments. Number one, I would tell you how mega cities are unique actors with unique economic power within developing countries. Secondly, we'll tell you how mega cities provide resources to smaller regions that propels their economic growth, right? But before that, just one issue to deal with the entire government bench, since I didn't really hear an extension, right? We think the question is, where will the life of residents within megacities become a lot worse? Because the first thing is what we heard from OG was that megacities are now no longer able to sustain the lifestyle of residents. And this is so weird for them to assume, because like, aren't they the team that is going to stop the economic development within megacities? They are literally the team that is going to uproot the lives that people within these megacities by displacing them and put them in different areas. It is your side that people must now restart their lives. Right? I think, to be fair, I think rich middle class would be generally okay. But for a person that started poor, moved to a megacity and began to build their life over it, these are the people that you will be displacing. You think these are the people that you force them to restart their lives, that they have done so much to rebuild from scratch, right? But the second thing, let's say, is that it is false for them to assume that the poor middle-income individuals will make it. We think like there's a huge cost to moving under their will. This is not as easy as closing government will have to posit to you. Because maybe they can get jobs, but they now need to spend time to get jobs that they would have already had when they were in a mega city. They now need to buy a house, now need to get rent, now need to find schools for their kids to be on. And we probably still have like some emotional attachment to their house that they lived in a mega city. I think that's also very valuable. We think it also takes time before these regions develop into places where they can give them good jobs or give them a rich lifestyle, right? Inclusion. It's really expensive for them to move. And most people another wrong for them to just drop. They have and they have really high living costs. I think it's a pretty exaggeration because that's how jobs get a lot better. Because you small region, that's not scratch. I think that's not high. So I think if you small region has many foreign direct investment infrastructure on the same as we also this not being as a megacity bit. It is actually as a result of the building for job creation and these cities aren't as big. Like these cities are literally powerful for megacities put either right at them. Secondly, this idea about living costs, right? The living costs is really high. Like it is your cities that are going to be a lot more expensive because they do not benefit from the same economy scale, even though they have much less. They do not get investment from MNCs. You think in a world in which you live in a megacity, they benefit from intense competition from within these regions, from within their megacities. When many 7-Elevens must compete, even when like many of your smallest like necessary products become a lot more cheaper in a world that is a megacity, when a world where competition is a lot higher in these cities. As a result, we think life in a megacity, or residents in megacities are better off within megacities as compared to your world when you would rather displace them and put them in an area and say that you would provide a much better life. Before I move on,
So Kuala Lumpur and Bangkok are perfectly manageable cities with between 3 to 5 million residents. Why do we need mega cities like Dhaka and Jakarta, which are more than 10 million strong? What's the marginal benefit?
no, what does that mean? If you are saying that they're about equal in economic power, then these places aren't like intensively megacities, right? These are regions where there's a high disparity between a megacity and smaller regions. We think that the economic benefits, the economic growth that is propelled by megacities are one that in your world cannot be replaced by any other city. First argument: how are megacities necessary to the development of a poorer country? Megacities have unique economic leverage. We think firstly, these cities are usually more business friendly in the way that they probably have a higher quality of education, stronger social communication in the way that they probably have higher literacy rates in that sense. We think as a result, investments are more likely to go into these areas. But secondly, they're more likely to be strategically, geographically placed. As we most megacities are at the outer regions of it. Anything that makes it a hub for exports and imports, a catalyst for international trade, right? It also makes it very attractive for tourism industries, which a lot of developing cities are based upon. As a result of it being very geographically, strategically placed and being maybe a very pretty city in that sense. Thirdly, we think megacities often simply just have more resources. They probably just have larger land area, more oil in those regions, in resources, a more capable workforce. Note, panel, that these things are uncontrollable, and it is unfortunate that only specific regions have these benefits. But given that megacities have immense economic potential that your other small cities don't have, it is the best interest of a government to exploit that. So no matter how much you downsize, how much ever you shift resources, your smaller regions will never reach the same kind of economic peak that these countries will face. But why do megacities provide resources to smaller regions in these areas? Firstly, we think megacities distribute higher tax inputs than any other region, like New York and Madrid. The wealth and infrastructure built in smaller regions come from the tax revenue of these megacities. Countries often climb out of poverty over a debt crisis because megacities are able to bail them out. We think in a world in which you don't have that, it's less likely to happen. Secondly, companies in megacities are the primary exporter and importer between neighboring regions. For reasons of, like I said before, being more business friendly and strategically placed, the export revenue of the smaller, poorer regions that you want to talk about come from the resources provided by megacities. What's even more beneficial is that the export that comes from megacities come without any duty taxes, without any tariffs, because they're from within. We think the export and import relationship between neighboring regions and a megacity is one that's incredibly important, because your entire export surplus that you may have is a direct result of a megacity being next to you. But thirdly, megacities spearhead the creation of businesses in smaller countries. In most countries, the HQs of MNCs are built within the MNCs, and more often than not, it is the business ventures of these MNCs with their HQs that build coal mines in regional areas, that build factories and give them intellectual ability for them to grow. We think as a result of that, megacities are literally the primary provider of any economic development that a smaller region can have. We think that is primarily important for them to always exist. Members of the floor, economic growth of classing. True that over the past 2 decades, when H&M, KFC, and all bunch of MNCs started booming up in Dhaka, that you wouldn't see the fact that inequality didn't get demolished, the fact that it's still as persistent as it was 2 decades ago, prior to the existence of H&M and a lot of these other MNCs and like fast fashion companies coming into that industry, means that oftentimes when you're talking about developing countries, means that there is a high number of individuals who are from the low economic classes. It means that there's a high rate of individuals who are not as educated. It means that there's also a probably high rate of some form of corruption, meant that oftentimes having MNCs and being attractive when it comes to just being the hub for economic gain doesn't necessarily mean that you would end up helping people in the long run. The problem with megacities is you get to mask all of that by saying all of the things that member of government says, which is exactly why we think that it's about time we unveil those ways in which we mask the sort of deprivation that people go through. In my speech, I'm going to talk about two things. Number one, why megacities are failing its people, and number two, why we think our alternative better sustainably helps individuals. But before that, a direct rebuttal towards closing opposition. Firstly, closing opposition says that the reason why we can't stop megacities from existing is because they're geographically located. They have a good hub for like ports and exports and imports. Like, okay, just because we're saying that megacities shouldn't exist to the extent that they are existing now doesn't mean that the geographical asset disappears, that they don't have that port anymore. I think that closing government is confusing themselves between megacities and cities, because I think the idea of megacities decreasing in size doesn't necessarily mean that it loses complete overall in absolute any form of attraction that it initially had, which is that it still has a lot of businesses going on there. The fact that there are many privileged individuals who still choose to stay there. They said, oh, but then don't privileged individuals just move out? That's not necessarily true. Some do, some stay, right? The fact that there are many people who are within your corrupted government officials, people who are invested within their local companies, who are like people who benefited from their inheritance, a lot of people who are made up from the upper, like middle class or even the absolute upper class, these people still stay there, means that those businesses and a lot of the money that you were talking about still exists within these mega cities. But at least you get a lot of more trickle down and like distribution of wealth when middle class individuals, lower middle class individuals who are still working class people who are on the margins of deciding, should I stay in the city or like mega city or should I move out? But oftentimes stay in the mega cities because they feel they have no choice, because there is no job provided for them outside. We move those classes of individuals outside. That's why you still get some form of booming classes even within these new areas who are equally educated, who can then sustainably improve those areas. No. Secondly, closing government says that it's expensive for you to move out. Like, sure, but it's also about a comparative cost of which these individuals can make. Right now, they have no other alternative. We tell them that you have those choices, given the fact that currently there are many people who are sold the dream that moving into the city is somehow going to give you a better life, when clearly it didn't. But you keep on blaming yourself, and that's something that we think should stop. First question, why megacities are failing its people. Opening opposition says that it's not failing because people flood to the megacities, eventually push satellite cities to come to be. Like, this is so weird, right? Because this is the benefit that you're claiming. You want people to flood the megacities so that people will move to satellite cities, eventually conceding that having an over influx of people within megacities is a bad thing. That in principle, you want people to trickle out into other areas so that other areas can eventually boom. No. Second thing, satellite cities being connected to megacities doesn't solve the problem of the main attraction of majority of jobs still being highly stop hackling, still being concentrated within these mega cities. I think that the point at which you move out towards rural areas, that's when you get a lot more like jobs that are not entirely dependent upon mega cities. Therefore, you don't get a lot of the harms that Naja talked about, which was never negated by closing opposition. That oftentimes when you have your foreign MNCs, but at the same time, there are other companies as well, foreign MNCs survive because you have your corrupted officials and all that cushioning them, but a lot of the local companies die out, or even if they're still surviving right now, they give out individuals shit pay, but because the demand for jobs is high, but at the same time purchasing power is low because people are still not getting meaningful pay to be able to buy your services and your products, mean that oftentimes these individuals who apply for the job are oftentimes disposable. Means that people settle for a lot of low pay that exists within these cities. Why is it better in our world? I'll get to that in like my second question. But thirdly, they talked about automation. The problem with developing countries is there's a huge lower middle to lower income groups of individuals. They still rely on a lot of labor work. Sure, automation is inevitable. The problem with mega cities within Dhaka and Jakarta is that automation happens at too fast of a rate before these people can learn to like transition in towards being able to cope with the new market that it demands. That is that there is with. And then the problem with mega cities is that the political sphere fails its people, right? The lower middle income people get clumped together with the rich in mega cities, makes it very easy for politicians to ignore the voices of the lower class because they still represent the same district of the richer individuals, which means that all they have to do is appease the richer individuals without having to necessarily listen to the lower class individuals. I'll flip all of this in my second question as to why we make it a better world after this POI.
It doesn't matter if Dhaka is spearheading automation or not, because the point is low-income countries wanted companies to come in and provide jobs. If other countries have high amounts of automation, it doesn't matter if Dhaka is spearheading automation as well.
Got it. Yeah, so I think the best way in which you would still get, okay, A, you probably still have the attraction of automation into those cities anyways. B, you still get FDIs now to go into those other cities that have actual sustainable people who want those jobs because there's a market there. You can also get automation there as well, and at least at a rate of which people can keep up with. But why is our alternative better? The problem with the better thing about our world is that when you distribute people across like these newer areas, like and they're like working class individuals, educated class individuals, means that the government has to listen to them, not just give them. They said, oh, you have a political incentive to want to listen to these individuals because otherwise you lose out the vote. No, that's not true. If they're uneducated and they don't have purchasing power and no capital, governments give to shut them up, right? You give them cash handouts as opposed to when you're working class within our new areas. Governments have to engage with them, have to give them meaningful policy changes, structural changes, sustainable policies that will make sure these areas develop but also become attractive enough for FDIs to go in. We think mega cities is just a facade to say that our economy is thriving, when in actuality it's gone to shits for the people who have had to settle in the ghettos. Thank you.
All right, last week.
Here.
The huge amount of debt and historical lockout from opportunities is unique to developing countries, which means that economic growth is dire to them because you have to get your economic growth to overtake all that debt and all that lack of opportunity. If you have no ability to sustain that growth, if it stagnates and you have your biggest bets all losing out now and you spread out all your bets between smaller, like start from scratch cities, we think that you're more likely to fail as a developing country. That's the link that was not provided by the opening opposition. I'll deal with that specifically by revisiting Katrina's speech, but also dealing with the opening of closing of government and then the opening government. But first, let's look at what the opening opposition attempted to say. So their biggest case that comes from the opening government that they specifically rely on is this hopes that they have like satellite cities and also that developing countries can essentially funnel money from like big cities and to the welfare of smaller rural areas. But they think that essentially what came from Katrina's speech was the unique benefits that these satellite cities that these mega cities have that essentially is not found in any other cities. So even if the whole of government bench wants to put all their bets on start from scratch cities, they don't have the unique abilities that mega cities have. This means that the unique geographical positions means that if you funnel more money into that unique geographical position without having to spend on other start from scratch cities, you're more likely to pull out the economic growth of these cities that came uniquely from the closing opposition side. But we also say that satellite
satellite, it's not just about satellite cities or the outskirts of cities. Let's look at what the model from government is which is that essentially they're built off of rural areas, and note that in developing countries, rural areas are even far worse off and even more barren. But essentially, when you start from scratch, you have nothing to build off on. Whereas the unique ability for megacities is that the infrastructure is already existing, the investments are already existing, the technologies are already existing, which means you can build all of these cities and expand into the outskirts that they say is so harmful. Maybe it's not so harmful to actually live in the outskirts, because eventually those areas will also trickle down with the developments that are essentially come from the gentrification, right? Essentially, we are saying that if you downsize it, you clip the wings of economic growth in these developing nations, because you have no ability to hedge your bets on the best versions of your cities, but always have to hedge your bets on various areas that have no prior interest, right? The thing that comes from megacities also is this ability to have economies of scale as a result of already having prior MNCs, already having these prior abilities like 7-Elevens that are essential to lowering the cost of cost of living within these areas. These are things that are unique to megacities that you won't have in regular cities or in rural areas that they rely on with the closing government. Because the first thing I want to know is that I don't really know what the differentiation of their extension is. But will start to exist as a result, because that's the government case versus the opposition, right? We are saying that essentially the growth of megacities and will expand and create benefits towards a larger nation compared to theirs that starts from scratch, right? We say that essentially MNCs would invest more in pre-existing infrastructure, pre-existing ability to create factories that encourage higher production and lower cost of living, right? That's literally more logical than attempting to enter into an area, because essentially if there's no first mover's advantage to it, instead you disadvantage yourself as a result of spending the money first and creating the private infrastructure, and then other people benefiting off of it, right? If you are able to expand on megacities that already exist, because we don't think that people will just keep going to the centers of the city. The center of the city also widens up, and essentially the outskirts will also develop as a result. Then the closing government is saying that living in the outskirts is a harm isn't really a harm. Instead, we would also find to say it's a benefit. But here's where I deal with the government bench, the entire basic case that comes from government. First of all, it's not necessarily nuanced to it being developing countries. But secondly, it's also non-comparative to the possible benefits of gentrification. It's not enough to just say that gentrification is bad. Before that, sure.
So other than your rehash of OO, can you please tell us why is it that your transition is very likely to be in line with how much the lower middle class people, who are majority of people in developing countries, can keep up with?
No, people who are in the middle class essentially enter into these areas and gain the benefits of gentrification. So even if it's true that Naja says that there's no jobs in these megacities, they still benefit from higher quality of medicine, right? The fact that they are outside of these areas means that they don't actually benefit from the higher quality of products, that they self-medicate or they have lower quality of food. Essentially, we see that even the middle class benefits off of these areas, but also actually get some jobs compared to the no jobs that exist in their start from scratch cities that come from the government side. That's the comparative that they hold the government bench essentially misses out on. But here's where I think that essentially there's a basic case that runs through the line of government bench, and if we can say that comparatively ours is better than theirs, what they say it wins this case, right? Open government says that the cost of living will get higher, that all this list of problems like traffic jams will get worse. But if it's true that these problems exist, capping it and preventing the development of solutions to that problem will only create a stagnation of those problems. This means that if people are already living in these cities and no way you're going to move everyone out of these cities, essentially the problems get worse and the magnitude of problems get a lot worse on their side compared to ours, where you actually have the ability to innovate on these cities and create better transport systems. You prevent the jams of Jakarta, give them time. Essentially, you'll have better abilities to fix these problems on our side, but also the outskirts can also model after these innovations as a result of that innovation existing to begin with. If you had no pre-existing innovations, innovations, you have no ability for outside outskirt areas to ever compete against this, right? But you also say that essentially, what's unique to this is that there's a debt crisis. Oftentimes, there's a debt crisis within these developing areas. This means that it's not about jobs with low pay, but rather ensuring that people just have jobs to begin with, and also can benefit from the lower cost of living, that actually is more driven down on our side as a result of better ability to innovate in our worlds. Essentially, if you have more economies of scale, if you have more ability to have cheaper and more competitive prices, it means that people when you get lower pay of jobs, but will have jobs, but also can save a lot more compared to you paying within your start from such cities. Literally, all the products within your cities are more likely to be more expensive because the people have to invest in completely new areas compared to ours that already exist. This is primary within this debate, because essentially it tells you how the development is essential to a developing nation. If you have nothing to start from, and you always cap whatever has already existed, you have an inability to attract actual investors, and you have an inability to find new ways to solve problems that already exist. We think that the government side essentially stagnates developing countries and makes them worse off.
Thank you.